There is a list in the Bible that almost every Christian has memorized: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. 9 words, 1 verse, Galatians 5:22. You have seen them on posters, on coffee mugs, on the walls of Sunday school classrooms painted in cheerful colors between drawings of apples and grapes. And because you have seen them so many times, in such comfortable settings, you may have made one fatal assumption about them: that they are a checklist, that the Christian life is about acquiring these 9 qualities, adding them one by one like badges, working harder, trying longer, being more patient, more kind, more gentle, until finally, after enough effort, you become the kind of person the list describes. But here is what almost nobody tells you. Paul, the man who wrote the list, never called them achievements. He called them fruit. And if you have ever spent 1 hour in a garden, you already know the difference. You do not make fruit happen. You do not manufacture it. You do not try your way into it. Fruit is the natural, inevitable result of a tree that is rooted in the right soil, drinking from the right source, connected to the right vine. Which means the entire conversation about the fruit of the Spirit is not really about behavior. It is about belonging. And that changes everything.
Before we examine the fruit, we need to understand the soil it was planted in. Because Paul did not write Galatians 5 as an inspirational list. He wrote it as a response to a crisis. The churches in Galatia were being torn apart. A group of teachers had arrived after Paul left, insisting that faith in Jesus was not enough. You also needed circumcision. You needed the law of Moses. You needed to perform, to achieve, to earn your standing before God through religious effort and ritual compliance. And the result of that pressure? Galatians 5:15 describes it with brutal honesty. If you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. The community that was supposed to model divine love was eating itself alive. Not because they were bad people, because they were performing. And here is the psychological truth that Paul understood long before modern research confirmed it. When human beings live under the pressure of constant performance, when worth is conditional on behavior, when acceptance requires earning, they do not become more loving. They become more anxious, more competitive, more brittle, more cruel. The flesh, Paul's word for the ego-driven, self-protective, fear-managed self, produces a very specific harvest. He lists it in the verses just before the fruit: hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions. And almost nobody notices the connection. Those are not the sins of people who don't care. Those are the sins of people who are desperately trying to matter and have been told their mattering depends on their performance. The fruit of the Spirit is not a better version of that striving. It is the end of it.
To understand how the fruit grows, you need one image. Jesus gave it to his disciples the night before he was crucified. John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Not a little, not less, nothing. A branch does not generate fruit through effort. It does not squeeze harder or think more carefully or try more consistently. It abides. It stays connected. It remains. The sap, the life, flows from the vine into the branch, and the fruit appears, not because the branch earned it, because the branch stayed. And this is the architecture the fruit of the Spirit is built on.
These 9 qualities are not targets to aim at. They are evidence, the visible, tangible, touchable evidence that the Spirit of God is flowing through a life that has learned to abide. Which means your question should never be, how do I become more patient? Your question should be, what is disconnecting me from the vine? Because patience, real patience, not gritted teeth and clenched jaw, is what happens when a human being is rooted in a peace that doesn't depend on the outcome of the situation they are being patient about. It flows. It doesn't force. Now, let's walk through each one, not as a list, as a landscape.
Paul places love first, not by accident. In 1 Corinthians 13, the same author, he says that without love, every other spiritual gift, every act of sacrifice, every mountain-moving faith is nothing. Not less, nothing. But the Greek word he uses, and that the Spirit produces, is not the love the modern world recognizes. It is agape. Not the love that responds to lovable things. Not the love that arrives when it feels natural. Not the love that requires the other person to deserve it first. Agape is a chosen love, a willed love. The love that moved toward humanity not because humanity had earned it, but because love, by its nature, moves toward. How do you live it out? You practice seeing people as more than their usefulness to you. You choose the action before the feeling arrives, because agape does not wait for warmth. It creates it. Here is a fact that should stop. Paul wrote the most joy-saturated letter in the New Testament from inside a Roman prison. Philippians, where he writes, "Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice," was written in chains, which means biblical joy is not happiness. Happiness is a response to circumstances. It rises when things go well, it falls when they don't. It is, by definition, conditional. Joy, the fruit of the Spirit, is something underneath circumstances. It is the settled, unshakable awareness that the deepest things are already secured, that the outcome of your life is not in the hands of your worst day, that the grave is not the last word. Paul could rejoice in prison because his joy was not stored in the prison's conditions. How do you live it out? You practice gratitude not as a feeling, but as a discipline. You name what is already true, not what you wish were different. You train your attention to return, again and again. Joy is not performed, it is practiced into place.
In Mark 4, a storm descends on the Sea of Galilee so violently that experienced fishermen are convinced they are going to die. And Jesus is asleep. Not troubled sleep, not fitful rest, deeply, fully, peacefully asleep. Same storm, completely different interior. Philippians 4:7 describes the peace of God as something that surpasses understanding. Read that carefully. It does not say the peace that comes when you understand your situation. It says the peace that surpasses understanding, that exists even when you cannot explain it, even when the math doesn't add up, even when the storm is real and the boat is small. How do you live it out? Verse 6 gives the answer. In every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. You do not manufacture peace. You release what you are carrying, and the peace that comes is not yours. It is His, standing guard over your mind and heart. There is an old joke among Christians. Never pray for patience, because God will give you something to be patient about. But the joke accidentally tells the truth about how patience works. The Greek word here is makrothumia. It literally means long suffering, long fuse, extended capacity, slow to ignite. And almost nobody notices that the biblical examples of patience are never about easy waiting. Abraham waited 25 years for a son. Job sat in ash and silence long after the answers stopped coming. The early church waited and waited and waited for a return that felt increasingly distant. Patience in Scripture is not passive. It is active endurance with dignity. It is the refusal to let the delay become bitterness. How do you live it out? You reframe the wait as formation. You ask not, "Why is this taking so long?" but "What is being built in me while I wait?" Because nothing is wasted in the economy of God, not even the long silences. Kindness and goodness appear together in Paul's list, and most people treat them as synonyms, but they are not. Kindness, the Greek krestotes, is the quality of being useful to others. It is the orientation of a life turned outward, soft, approachable, generous in spirit. Jesus was described as kind to those the religious system had dismissed, the tax collectors, the lepers, the women caught in shame. He didn't begin with their failures. He began with their humanity. Goodness, agathusini, is something stronger.
It is moral integrity with edges. It is kindness with a backbone. Goodness can rebuke. It can confront. It can look at injustice and refuse to call it peace. Jesus displayed goodness when he overturned the tables in the temple. That was not a loss of patience. That was goodness in motion, righteousness that could not stay silent in the face of exploitation. How do you live them out? Kindness, practice seeing people before their behavior. Goodness, practice telling the truth even when silence would be easier. One makes people feel safe. The other keeps them honest. You need both.
Faithfulness is the least dramatic of the 9. It will never trend. It will not produce a viral moment. It does not arrive in a flash of inspiration or emotion. It is built in the Tuesday mornings when no one is watching, in the commitments honored when honoring them is inconvenient, in the promises kept to people who will never know how much it cost. The Greek word is pistis, the same word translated elsewhere as faith, which means faithfulness is not just a character trait. It is the outward form of inward trust. The person who is faithful to their word is the person who believes that integrity matters beyond the moment, that God sees what no one else sees, that the unseen audience is the most important one. How do you live it out? Start smaller than you think. Be faithful in the small thing directly in front of you, because Jesus said the one who is faithful in little will be trusted with much. Faithfulness is not built at scale. It is built in secret, one kept word at a time.
Gentleness has been one of the most misread words in the Christian vocabulary. It has been confused with weakness, with passivity, with the inability to hold a position or defend a truth. But the Greek word, proutes, does not mean weakness. It was used in the ancient world to describe a wild horse that had been trained, not broken, trained. All the power, all the strength, but now channeled, controlled, directed with perceive. Moses was described in Numbers 12:3 as the meekest man on earth. The same word, the same concept. And Moses stood before Pharaoh, parted seas, and carried the weight of a nation for 40 years. He was not weak, he was controlled. Gentleness is strength that has learned exactly how much force each situation requires and chooses to use no more than that. How do you live it out? Before you respond, pause. Ask, what does this moment actually need from me? Not what do I want to say, not what do they deserve. What does this moment need? Then bring only that.
Paul places self-control last, and it may be the most countercultural of the 9. We live in an age that has made indulgence a virtue, that calls every impulse authentic and every boundary repressive, that says the truest version of yourself is the unfiltered one, the one that reacts without pausing, desires without questioning, consumes without considering the cost. But the Greek, enkratia, means mastery from within, not the white-knuckled suppression of desire, not religious performance disguised as discipline. It is the inner governance of a life whose desires have been reoriented, not crushed, but redirected. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 9, compares himself to an athlete who disciplines his body, not to punish it, but to keep it from becoming the master. Self-control is the fruit that makes space for all the others, because love without self-control becomes possessiveness. Joy without self-control becomes hedonism. Kindness without self-control becomes people-pleasing. Self-control is the riverbank that gives the river its power. How do you live it out? You build the fence before you need it. You make decisions about your limits not in the moment of temptation, but long before the moment arrives. The athlete doesn't decide whether to train when the alarm goes off. That decision was made the night before.
Galatians 5:23 ends the list with a phrase that has always struck me as quietly defiant. Against such things there is no law. Paul is pointing at the religious system that has been pressuring these people, the system that says you need more rules, more rituals, more requirements, and he says, there is no law that governs what the Spirit grows. You cannot legislate love into existence. You cannot mandate joy. You cannot pass a rule that produces gentleness in a human heart. These things come from somewhere the law cannot reach. They come from the inside, from the root, from what happens when a branch stays connected to the vine and simply receives what the vine was always offering.
So here is the only real question. Not which of the 9 do I need to work on, but what is keeping me from the vine? What anxiety? What performance? What need to prove something to someone? What bitterness that is slowly cutting you off from your own source? Because the fruit is not the goal. The fruit is what happens when you stop performing and start abiding. When you stop striving to be more loving and start returning again and again to the one who is love itself. The fruit will come, not because you forced it, because you stayed. The branch doesn't produce, it receives. And what it receives eventually becomes visible to everyone.